Abigail's heart pounded as she dropped the basket of sheets. As the laundry basket crashed to the floor, white sheets spilling across the hardwood like ghosts. On the television screen, a man smiled during a local news segment about teachers making a difference. He was a stranger to everyone watching, everyone except her. Because Abigail recognized those eyes. She'd spent 3 decades searching for them. The birthmark near his left ear sealed it. That was her son, her baby, the one who vanished from her hospital room 30 years ago, and he had absolutely no idea who he really was. If this story gives you chills, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these incredible true stories. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. May 15, 1994, started as the most beautiful day of Abigail's life. At 24 years old, she lay in a hospital bed at Lancaster General Hospital in Pennsylvania, cradling her newborn son against her chest. Daniel James, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of pure perfection. Her husband Richard stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, both of them staring at the tiny human they'd created. Daniel's fingers wrapped around Abigail's thumb with surprising strength for someone only 3 hours old. The room smelled like antiseptic and hope. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the window. Richard kept taking pictures with their disposable camera, wanting to capture every moment. They'd waited so long for this, 2 years of trying, 1 heartbreaking miscarriage, and finally, Daniel was here. Real. Warm. Theirs. A nurse entered the room with a practiced smile. Her name tag read Margaret Holloway. She was middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Nothing about her seemed threatening or unusual. "I need to take him for his newborn screening," Margaret said, her voice gentle and professional. "Just routine tests. I'll have him back in 15 minutes. Abigail hesitated. Her arms tightened instinctively around Daniel. Richard squeezed her shoulder. "It's okay, honey. It's just down the hall." Reluctantly, Abigail released her grip. Margaret lifted Daniel with practiced ease. 15 minutes, she repeated. "Try to rest, Mom." The door closed with a soft click. Abigail was exhausted. Labor had lasted 14 hours. Richard settled into the chair beside her bed. They talked about paint colors for the nursery, about names for future siblings. 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Abigail shifted uncomfortably. Richard stood and walked to the door, peering down the hallway. "Maybe they're busy," he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. 45 minutes. Abigail pressed the call button. A different nurse appeared, younger with a confused expression when Abigail asked about Daniel. "I'm sorry, who took him?" "Nurse Margaret, for his screening, almost an hour ago." The young nurse's face changed. Something flickered across it. Fear. "I'll go check." She left quickly, too quickly. 5 minutes later, the hallway erupted with noise. Voices raised in panic, footsteps running. The young nurse burst back into the room, followed by a doctor. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to stay calm. Where's my baby? Where's Daniel?" Security guards appeared, then more hospital staff. Someone mentioned checking the exits. Abigail tried to get out of bed, but pain shot through her body. Richard had to physically restrain her as she screamed her son's name down the corridor. Police arrived. Detective Raymond Kovich, a tall man with gray hair, took over the scene. The hospital went into lockdown, but Daniel was gone, and so was Nurse Margaret Holloway. Security footage showed Margaret walking calmly through a service exit 42 minutes after taking Daniel. She carried a small bundle wrapped in hospital blankets. She'd changed into civilian clothes, a red jacket, jeans, sunglasses. At her car, she paused, adjusted the bundle, got in, drove away. By morning, the investigation revealed the worst. Margaret Holloway didn't exist. Fake credentials, fabricated references. The brown sedan was a rental under another fake identity. Found abandoned 3 days later in Pittsburgh, wiped clean. Whoever took Daniel had planned it perfectly. The Amber Alert went out immediately. Daniel's face appeared on news channels across Pennsylvania, then nationally. Abigail and Richard's devastated faces became familiar to millions. The FBI joined the investigation. Weeks became months. Leads dried up. Tips flooded in, each one leading nowhere. On the first anniversary of Daniel's disappearance, Abigail had a complete breakdown. She stopped leaving the house, stopped eating. Daniel's nursery remained exactly as they'd prepared it. She went in there every day and sat in the rocking chair, holding the hospital blanket that still carried his scent, though that scent faded until finally it was gone. Their marriage nearly shattered. Richard wanted to move forward, not to forget, but to survive. Abigail saw this as betrayal. Every child she saw became Daniel in her mind. Detective Kovach visited less frequently. At the 2-year mark, he sat in their living room and said the words no parent wants to hear. Most missing children cases that aren't solved in the first 48 hours. The chances of recovery decrease significantly. 3 years after Daniel vanished, Abigail discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like a physical blow. It felt like a betrayal. Richard held her and whispered that maybe this was their second chance. Emily was born in 1997. From the moment Emily entered the world, Abigail refused to let her out of sight. She insisted on a home birth with a midwife. No hospitals. Never hospitals again. 5 years later, Nathan was born. Abigail loved both her children desperately, but there was always a distance, a part of her that remained locked away in that hospital room. Emily and Nathan grew up in a house with a locked bedroom, Daniel's room, the shrine. When Emily turned 10, she asked about it. Richard told them the simplified truth. They had a brother. He went away. Emily saw the pain flash across her mother's face and never asked again. The years accumulated. Daniel would have been 11, 16, 21. Abigail imagined him at every milestone. She created an entire alternate life for him in her mind, devastating because none of it was real. She joined online forums for parents of missing children, found others who understood the specific torture of not knowing. Death offered closure. Disappearance offered only questions that echoed forever. Richard's patience was remarkable. He just stayed, steady, present. Emily grew up and went to college, studying social work. Nathan became an artist who drew portraits of a brother he'd never met. Detective Kovach retired but continued sending Christmas cards. Inside each one, still thinking about your case. On Abigail's 50th birthday, she looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. When had she gotten old? October 8th, 2024. A Tuesday. Abigail was 54 years old. The house felt too big and too quiet. Abigail folded laundry in the living room. The television on for background noise. A local news program played. She wasn't really watching. Until she was. The segment introduced Christopher Walsh, a 30-year-old elementary school teacher from Columbus, Ohio. He'd won an award for his innovative teaching methods. The camera showed him in his classroom, laughing as he explained something. Then a close-up of his face. The laundry basket fell from Abigail's hands. Time stopped. She knew those eyes. The exact shade of brown flecked with gold. She knew that smile, slightly crooked on the left side, the way he tilted his head. And there, visible for just a moment when he turned, a small birthmark near his left ear. Daniel had been born with that exact birthmark. "That's my son." She said it out loud to the empty room. "That's Daniel." Her hands shook as she grabbed for her phone. The segment ended. She ran to the computer, typing with trembling fingers. Christopher Walsh, teacher, Ohio. There, Riverside Elementary School, Columbus. And there was his face again. Christopher Daniel Walsh, 3rd grade teacher. Abigail studied every pixel, compared it mentally to photos of Daniel as a newborn, to photos of Emily and Nathan. The resemblance was undeniable. The curve of the eyebrows, the shape of the nose. These were genetic markers, family traits. She pulled up baby photos. Daniel at 3 hours old. She zoomed in on the birthmark, then found a high-resolution photo of Christopher. The birthmark was there. Same location, same shape. Hours passed. Richard came home to find her surrounded by printed photos scattered across the desk. Papers marked with notes, connections drawn in red pen. "Abby, what's going on?" She turned to face him. She looked wild, intense, but not broken. Richard. I found him. I found our son. Richard had heard this before. Abigail had found Daniel dozens of times over the years. Honey, let's talk about this. No, listen to me. Look at these photos. She showed him everything. The news segment. Christopher's staff photo. Side-by-side comparisons. The birthmark evidence. Richard's skepticism slowly shifted. As an engineer, he analyzed data objectively, and the data was compelling. The resemblance is strong, he admitted, but resemblance isn't proof. The birthmark, Richard, the birthmark is identical. They argued for hours. Richard wanted to be cautious. Abigail was adamant. This was different. Finally, Richard suggested a compromise. They'd hire a private investigator. If the investigator found evidence supporting her theory, they'd take it to the police. Richard called Julian Ortega, a former FBI agent. When Richard explained the situation, Julian was honest. Most parents who think they've found their missing child are wrong, but I'll look into it. Julian worked with impressive efficiency. Within a week, he'd compiled a comprehensive report. Christopher Walsh, born May 20th, 1994, just 5 days after Daniel was taken. Raised in Cleveland by a single mother, Helen Walsh. Helen had died 3 years ago from cancer. Christopher had lived a seemingly normal life. Good student, graduated from Ohio State, became a teacher. On the surface, nothing suspicious. But Julian dug deeper. Helen Walsh had no documented pregnancy in 1994, no prenatal medical records, no hospital birth records. Christopher's birth certificate listed a home birth with a midwife who couldn't be traced. Helen had been living in Pittsburgh in early 1994. She worked as a medical supply sales representative with access to hospitals across Pennsylvania. In late May, she suddenly moved to Cleveland, appeared with a baby. Julian found old neighbors who remembered Helen as intensely private. No family photos displayed. Never talked about Christopher's father. One neighbor remembered Helen having a breakdown when Christopher was about 5, sobbing that she'd done something terrible. Most damning, Helen had no photographs of Christopher before he was approximately 1 year old. When Christopher asked why, Helen claimed the photos had been destroyed in a fire, but there was no record of any fire. Julian presented his findings. I'm 85% certain this is your son. The timeline matches perfectly, but the only way to know for sure is DNA testing. He paused. However, you need to understand what this means. If Christopher is Daniel, his entire life is a lie. This information will devastate him. Abigail didn't hesitate. He deserves to know the truth. Julian suggested a careful approach. Email, letter, give him time. But Abigail couldn't wait. She'd been careful for 30 years. Against Julian's advice, Abigail and Richard drove to Columbus, found Riverside Elementary, and parked across the street. They waited. Then he appeared. Christopher Walsh walking out with 2 other teachers laughing. He wore khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt. Carried a worn messenger bag. He was tall, athletic. He moved with easy confidence. At his car, he took a phone call, smiled, ran his hand through his hair. Richard's gesture. Abigail watched through tears. That was her son, grown into a man she'd never known. 30 years of his life had happened without her, all of it missed, stolen. They followed him to a coffee shop. Christopher went inside, found a table and pulled out a laptop. Abigail turned to Richard. I have to talk to him. Abby, we should wait. I've waited 30 years. She entered the coffee shop. Christopher was grading papers. She walked to his table. He glanced up, smiled politely. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but words failed. Are you Christopher Walsh? Yes, can I help you? This is going to sound insane, but I need to talk to you about your mother. Helen. The smile faded. Did you know my mom? She passed away a few years ago. I know. But there's something you need to know about who she was, about who you are. Abigail showed him photos. Baby Daniel, then Emily and Nathan. I believe you are my son, that you were taken from me 30 years ago from a hospital in Lancaster, Pennsylvania." Christopher stared at the photos. His face went through emotions, confusion, disbelief, anger. "My mother would never—" He stood abruptly. "She was a good person. She loved me. She would never steal someone's child." "The birthmark. You have a birthmark near your left ear. My son had the exact same mark." Christopher's hand moved to the spot. His face paled. "That's just a coincidence. Please, just take a DNA test. If I'm wrong, I'll never contact you again." Christopher grabbed his things. "You need help. I'm sorry for whatever happened to you, but I'm not your missing kid." He walked toward the exit. Abigail followed. "Christopher, please." He turned. The look he gave her was pure pity. "My mother died 3 years ago. I watched her suffer. She was the best person I've ever known, and I'm not going to let some stranger destroy her memory." Then he was gone. Abigail stood trembling. Richard appeared, wrapped his arms around her. She collapsed against him, sobbing. That night, Christopher couldn't sleep. The woman was delusional. It had nothing to do with him. Except, at 2 a.m, he went to his childhood home, started pulling down boxes of old photos. He searched for baby pictures. He found photos starting around his first birthday, but nothing before that. No hospital photos, no newborn pictures, no pregnancy photos of Helen. He found his birth certificate, home birth, midwife named Sarah Chen. He searched online. Sarah Chen midwife, Cleveland, Ohio, 1994. Nothing. The earliest he could find was 2006. He called his Aunt Patricia. It was after 3 a.m. "Aunt Pat, did you ever see Mom pregnant with me?" A pause. Too long. "I was living in Seattle at the time." "When did you first meet me?" "When you were about 6 months old." "6 months? You didn't come when I was born?" "Your mother said she needed time." He hung up and opened Google. Baby stolen Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 1994. News articles loaded. Baby vanished from hospital. Parents devastated. Photos. A young couple crying. Names. Abigail and Richard Patterson. Their son Daniel James Patterson, born May 15, 1994. Christopher's birth certificate said May 20th, 5 days later. He read article after article. The investigation. The fake nurse. The decades-long search. At dawn, his phone buzzed. Email from Abigail Patterson. It contained Julian's investigation report. And at the bottom, "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm only asking for the truth. Don't you deserve that?" Christopher read the report. The case was damning. He sat with that knowledge for 3 days. Inside, he was falling apart. On the 4th day, he sent an email. "I'll take the test, but Helen was my mother in every way that mattered." Abigail's response came within minutes. "Thank you." They met at a medical laboratory. The process was simple. Cheek swabs, results in 5 to 7 days. As they left, Christopher turned to Abigail. "If this is true, what happens then?" Abigail's eyes filled with tears. "Then I get to know my son. But you don't know me. I'd like to know the man he became." The week that followed was the longest of his life. On day 6, Patricia called. "Chris, I always suspected something wasn't right, but I loved you so much. I was afraid if we pushed, Helen would disappear with you, so I didn't ask questions." "You knew?" "I suspected. I should have done something. I'm sorry." Day 7. Results ready. They met at Julian's office. Julian opened the envelope. "Christopher Walsh is biologically Daniel James Patterson. DNA match probability. 99.97% you are their son." Christopher heard the words but couldn't process them. The room tilted. Abigail made a sound. Half sob. Richard pulled her close. 30 years of searching had just ended, but for Christopher, 30 years of life had just been revealed as fiction. He stood, walked to the window. "My entire life is a lie. Every birthday, every memory, all lies." Abigail approached. "Not every memory. Her love for you was real. Was it? She stole me." Richard spoke quietly. The part where she raised you, that was all real. Built on kidnapping. Christopher's voice broke. I'm so angry at her, and I miss her, and I hate that she's not here to tell me why. Helen was 3 years dead. Her reasons died with her. Julian produced paperwork. Police would be contacted. Media would find out. Christopher signed forms without reading them. When it was over, Christopher left without looking at Abigail and Richard. For 3 days, Christopher didn't leave his apartment. He sat surrounded by Helen's things trying to understand. The doorbell rang on day 4. Christopher, it's Detective Raymond Kovich. I worked your case for 15 years. Please give me 10 minutes. Christopher opened the door to a man in his 70s. Kind eyes. I'm retired now, Kovich said. But I thought about you every day. Can I come in? Kovich sat on the couch. Helen raised you to be a good man. You're a teacher. You volunteer. You turned out well. That matters. Does it? I've been doing this job for 45 years. Most missing children cases end badly. Yours ended with you alive, healthy, loved. That's as close to a miracle as we get. Abigail and Richard didn't get a miracle. True, Helen committed a crime, but she also gave you a life. Those things coexist. Why did she do it? Kovich pulled out a file. Helen had 3 miscarriages. After the 3rd, severe postpartum psychosis. Was hospitalized. Released too early. Stopped medication. 6 months later, she took you. He opened a diary. Helen's handwriting. May 10th, 1994. I saw him today, my son. The one God promised me. I will save him. Christopher read the words. Helen's delusion laid bare. She wasn't evil, Kovich said. She was severely mentally ill. That doesn't excuse it, but it might help you understand. The final entry was dated 2021, before Helen's death. Christopher, I made a terrible mistake. I was broken. I convinced myself you were meant to be mine. I was wrong, but loving you saved my life. I'm sorry. I hope you can forgive me. Christopher read it 3 times. Helen had known, and she'd been sorry, but not sorry enough to make it right. She should have told me. She should have, Kovich agreed, but courage isn't always convenient. After Kovich left, Christopher picked up his phone, stared at Abigail's number. He called. Christopher, I read Helen's diary. What did it say? That she was sorry, that she was sick, that she loved me anyway. I wish I could hate her, Abigail said softly. But she kept you safe. She raised you to be kind. I don't know if I can call you Mom. Not yet, maybe not ever. That's more than okay. I just want a place in your life. I think I need to meet my siblings. They've been waiting their entire lives. They made plans. Christopher would come to Lancaster the following weekend. When the weekend arrived, Christopher drove to Lancaster, hands gripping the wheel. He'd researched Emily and Nathan online, strangers who were somehow his siblings. Richard answered the door. Up close, Christopher saw himself in Richard's features. Same nose, same hands. The living room felt too small for all the emotion. Emily stood when Christopher entered. Nathan sat on the couch, sketchbook in his lap. Emily broke the silence. This is the weirdest family reunion ever. Everyone laughed. Tension broke. Nathan pulled out his sketchbook. I've been drawing you for years. Pages of portraits, different ages, different versions. You're talented, Christopher said. Emily leaned forward. I became a social worker because of you. I wanted to help reunite families. They talked for hours. Christopher told them about Helen carefully. Her love, her dedication. Nathan showed Christopher Daniel's room. Baby furniture untouched for decades. He pulled out a photo album. Mom made this. Every year on your birthday, she'd write you a letter. Christopher opened the album. Each letter started the same. Dear Daniel, today you turn age. I wonder where you are. The letters were heartbreaking. After dinner, Abigail gave Christopher a small box. Inside, a tiny hospital bracelet. Baby boy James. This is the only thing I have from your first day. Christopher held the impossibly small bracelet. Physical proof he'd been Daniel before Christopher. He started therapy with Dr. Simone Beaumont. She helped him understand he didn't have to choose. He could be both. Over the following months, Christopher built tentative relationships. He visited Lancaster twice a month, met Emily's kids, watched Nathan paint, learned to call Richard Dad. Abigail, he called by her first name. Mom belonged to Helen. Christopher made decisions about identity. He kept Christopher Walsh legally, but added Daniel as a middle name. Christopher Daniel Walsh. A compromise honoring both lives. The media found out 9 months later. Baby stolen in 1994, found after 30 years. The story went viral. Christopher declined all interviews. Kovac gave one interview. Justice is complicated. The kidnapper is dead. The child is safe. The parents have answers. Sometimes resolution is the best we get. 1 year after the DNA test, Christopher took a teaching job in Lancaster. Moved within 10 minutes of Richard and Abigail. Weekly family dinners became tradition. They cooked together, shared stories. Christopher talked about Helen openly. Nathan painted a family portrait. 5 people, but in the background, Helen's silhouette. She's part of this story. The portrait hung in Abigail's living room. Christopher kept Helen's photos displayed, went to her grave regularly. I don't forgive you, but I understand you better. You were sick and scared. You loved me the best way you knew how. May 15th, 2025. 31 years since Daniel vanished. The family gathered. Christopher brought a cake. Richard raised his glass. 31 years ago, we lost our son. We never stopped looking. Today we have him back. Not the baby we lost, but the man he became. Christopher stood. I lost 30 years with you. Those years are gone, but I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere. The family gathered for a photo, connected by biology and trauma and determined love. Abigail still struggled sometimes, would stare at Christopher, lost in cataloging missed milestones. But she was learning to be grateful. You're a good man, she told Christopher. Helen raised you well. She did her best. You have the chance now. Different than you imagined, but still a chance. 2 years later, Christopher married Sarah Chen. Both families came. Christopher listed his parents as Richard Patterson, Abigail Patterson, and Helen Walsh. They all made me who I am. Christopher and Sarah had a daughter, named her Helen Abigail Walsh, honoring both grandmothers. 5 years after finding each other, Christopher stood in Abigail's living room watching his daughter play. Both families there, 28 people. Family rebuilt. He thought about Helen constantly. He chose to believe she'd be proud. The story didn't have a neat ending. It never would. But they were all here, alive, trying, building something new from broken pieces. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening to Abigail's story, to Christopher's story, to the story of a family destroyed and rebuilt in ways no one could have predicted. Please like this video and subscribe for more true stories of loss, hope, and impossible reunions. And leave a comment below. Have you already lost hope? I'd love to read your story.